Welcome to part 1 of the Chapter 2 lecture video on job performance. In this video, we will define job performance, review elements of a job analysis, and discuss performance management. Given all the elements that should be accounted for in assessing job performance, your textbook defines job performance as the value of the set of employee behaviors that contribute either positively or negatively to the organization's goal accomplishment. This definition places an emphasis on the value employee behaviors bring to the workplace as well as their relevance for the organization's overall goal accomplishment. So, what does it mean to be a good performer? Being a good performer typically includes 3 things: meeting task expectations, going the extra mile, and avoiding counterproductive behaviors. Now, meeting task expectations is often thought of as task performance, which includes engaging in behaviors that are formally required as key elements of success in the workplace. These behaviors include the tasks, duties, and responsibilities that are typically included in a job description. Additionally, task performance can be thought of as the explicit obligations you to agree to enact in exchange for compensation and continued employment when you start a new job. Task performance can be routine in that it includes well-known, expected, and habitable activities. Task performance can also be adaptive when it requires adaptability to novel, unusual, or unpredictable organizational conditions. For example, when employees were expected to work full-time from home during the pandemic. And then task performance can also be creative when it requires the development of novel and useful ideas or outcomes. Beyond formal task requirements, good performance also often includes extra role behaviors, also known as citizenship behaviors. Citizenship behaviors include behaviors that extend beyond the formal job description. They are voluntary employee activities that may or may not be rewarded, but that can contribute to the quality of the organization or the context itself. A simple example is someone who comes to work to make coffee for their coworkers. It isn't expected, but it's something that is appreciated and valuable. Alternatively, covering a sick coworker's shift can also be a form of citizenship behavior, assuming that it isn't a mandatory requirement of your job. And citizenship behaviors can be interpersonal, where they benefit coworkers and colleagues. They can involve like assisting, supporting, and developing others, like by offering to work an extra shift. They could be things like assisting coworkers with heavy workloads, teaching new employees, showing sportsmanship, or staying positive and optimistic. All of these things are examples of things that could be citizenship behaviors if they're not within the formal guidelines of your workplace. And citizenship behaviors also can be organizational when they benefit the larger organization by supporting and defending the company, working to improve work conditions, and then demonstrating loyalty are examples of organizational citizenship behaviors. Lastly, good performance also should include the absence of counterproductive work behaviors, or CWBs. And CWBs include intentional behaviors that hinder organizational goal accomplishment. And some examples of these include property deviance, so behaviors that harm the organization's assets and possessions like sabotage or threat. Another example is production deviance, which occurs when an employee intentionally reduces the efficiency of their work by wasting time and resources or using illegal substances or like things like drinking at work. There's also interpersonal deviance, or what your textbook refers to as political deviance. And this is another example of a CWB. Interpersonal deviance arises when employees intentionally disadvantage, undermine, or mistreat other employees by engaging in behaviors like incivility, aggression, harassment, abuse, bullying, social isolation, any of those kind of interpersonal mistreatment things that can happen in the workplace. Now, the different types of interpersonal deviance tend to be highly correlated, such that individuals who engage in one form also often engage in other types as well. And this means CWBs typically reflect a pattern of behavior rather than an isolated event. So if you have an employee that is engaging in one type of CWB, odds are that that person is also engaging in other types of CWBs and is doing them more often than once. Also important, CWBs tend to be contagious, having a rippling effect across the organization. And this means that when employees perceive coworkers or supervisors engaging in CWBs, they often also enact counterproductive work behaviors themselves. And this contagion can happen within the same level of the organization, being learned from coworker to coworker, or it can span levels. So like starting at the bottom and working its way up, or starting at the top and working its way down. Now, not all CWBs are self-serving. So some employees engage in what are called pro-social CWBs, which would violate the norms, rules, and practices at the organizational level, but are well-intentioned. And a good example of this is a waitress that doesn't charge customers for sodas. The activity is kind to the customers and may increase the chances that the customers return, but it also causes a loss of revenue for the restaurant. So this would be a type of pro-social CWB. So how do organizations identify what behavior should be formally required as part of the task performance? To do so, many organizations conduct what is known as a job analysis. And a job analysis is the process of getting detailed information about jobs while considering other contingencies, both internal and external to the organization. And to conduct a job analysis, you would first list activities required in that job while considering other existing jobs, the nature of the tasks, the required worker attributes, so what personality factors or KSAs are needed for success in that particular job. All of that would be considered as part of listing out those activities. Then you would rate the activities based on their importance or their frequency. So, how often someone would engage in the activity or the task, and how relevant and important it would be for that role. And then lastly, you would retain the activities that are rated highest. And these would become part of what is formally the task performance requirements. And these retained behaviors are taught in training programs as learning objectives, and then they're embedded into your performance evaluation systems as measures to evaluate said task performance. So realistically, you go through the whole process of a job analysis to figure out the activities that are most impactful for the job, and then you embed those activities within your job performance criteria. Now, when rating activities based on their importance or frequency, you would typically use either the Occupational Information Network or subject matter experts. The Occupational Information Network, also known as ONET, is a foundational system for classifying jobs, and it identifies over 1,000 broadly defined occupations, and it describes activities and KSAs required for those specific jobs. And you can click on the link to see how ONET works and work through a couple of examples if you're interested. Another option for rating activities is to use subject matter experts or SMEs. And SMEs possess deep knowledge about the specific job in question, and they typically acquire this knowledge because they have some formal experience or training. And SMEs often include people like job analysts, job incumbents, or supervisors, but they can also include customers and other roles as well. Now, there are two pieces of information that are most useful in a job analysis. The first are job descriptions, which include a list of tasks, duties, and responsibilities that a job entails. And the second type of information common in a job analysis includes a list of the KSAs an individual must have to perform the job. And if interested, please visit the link attached to this slide for some great examples of job descriptions and KSAs required for specific UNT positions. Just search a specific job and see what UNT lists as the description and specifications for that role. Now that we have a basic understanding of what job performance is and what it includes, we need to discuss performance management. Performance management, also known as PM, ensures that employees' behaviors and outputs are congruent with the goals of the organization. And there are three main components of PM or performance management. For starters, you must define performance by specifying relevant aspects of performance for that organization. This should correspond with the job analysis information described previously. Then you must evaluate performance by getting information on how well an employee is doing his or her job. And then lastly, you provide performance feedback so that employees can adjust their performance to meet organizational goals. Okay, so that is it for part 1 of the Chapter 2 lecture video. Please make sure you review part 2 as well.